My name is Kara Balog. I am the watershed coordinator with the Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District. We put on these workshops, the Siskiyou Forest Stewardship Workshop Series. It's a monthly series where we bring local and regional experts on various topics in forestry to bring expertise so that we start understanding how to deal with our own forests on a local level so we can make our own decisions in forest management. We've posted various topics ranging from community forestry to climate change to defensible space to prescribed fire. Videos of this workshop and past workshops can be found on our website at www.svrcd.org under the Rainbow Ridge column. Tonight we're going to talk about a very important topic. We're going to be talking about field breaks in Siskiyou County, what they are, how they're implemented, and how they work in a fire. So for that we've got 4 great speakers to talk to us tonight. We're going to start off with Julie Titus, Julie Titus. Julie has a bachelor's degree at the University of California, Santa Barbara in environmental studies and geography and has worked in Los Padres National Forest, Sequoia, the Shasta Trinity, and has done everything ranging from working on hotshot crews, helicopter crews, to fuels management and fire prevention. She retired in 2010 to retool and channel her knowledge and skills in wildfire and field hazard assessments, community fire protection, and she even had been instructing at the College of the Siskiyous. She maintains her fire line qualifications as a field observer. She lives here in Siskiyou County with her husband and has 2 girls and loves outdoor activities. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie to begin.
Well, there was an example, I think everybody saw that shot of what happened very quickly. That after it ran across some lighter grass fuels and hit this situation right here, which is why we're going to talk fuel breaks today. This is what can happen, and that's group torching, that's called. And what happens when that group torching gets going, and then you have a wind hit it, and you have crowns that are closed together, it'll go crown to crown, and that's what basically started happening there. So I'm not going to stay that long on that. There's other people that will talk more on that incident. I'm moving to this. There he goes, your fire triangle. I don't know if you've ever seen it like that. It's a pretty artistic one. But those 3 elements cause combustion. Now what I'm going to get into is the wildfire behavior triangle. That's the lower one. And there's the fire environment. There's key components that cause the combustion in the fire environment and cause propagation of the fire on the landscape. Okay, so we all know in order to have a wildfire start and go, it takes certain weather. Usually it can take topography, and it takes fuel. So now this is a pretty easy question. What do they have in common there? Fuel, exactly. So right there, your weather obviously, temperature, relative humidity, wind, precip. Does anybody know what's the most, what do you think is the most important in that factor on weather? RH is one, and wind. Wind is huge, which causes the RH to change too, but temperature is not. A lot of people think temperature, and that's not most important. Though Bowles had a very hot day, but hot one was in February, so. Topography. Normally topography is a big factor. All those, the smoke can be a huge factor. But when you have big winds, it's not necessarily a big factor. Okay, so fuels. Fuels is the one factor that we can manipulate. That's why, as humans, we realize that when we live in the wildlands, we need to do fuel treatments. So the broad classifications of fuels, it's called a fuel profile. Consists of ground litter, and then you have middle, which is your woody vegetation, shrubs, and then you have the canopy, top. Different trees, different types of canopies, but each fuel's profile contributes uniquely to combustion, and the degree of involvement varies with each fire situation. Okay, so flammability, the flammability of the fuel's profile depends on loading, density, all these things. You can just read, I'm not going to read it all to you here. You can see this. Moisture makes a difference if it's dry or if it's moist, meaning the time of year. Okay, so I have a question, and I'm going to come back to this. That's why thought, but our home's considered a wildland tool. What do you think? We're not, right now, we're going to talk a little bit, here's this fuel profile. This was actually on a project I've just done over above Dunsmuir High School. Very dense, obviously huge amount of fuel in there. What do we need to do here? What do you guys think? Right. And what a fuel break does is it'll reduce both the vertical and the horizontal. So fuels in there. So you would take out some of that little stuff and leave space. So it's not interlocking crowns. Okay, so that's the horizontal. The vertical, you take out brush, not a lot of brush, mostly trees, but this vertical stuff, if you're doing a fuel break along the road, you limb up that stuff. You can't climb it. You need that ladder. You need to reduce your ladder. You also, really important in the West, and the California, not just California, but most of the West and conifers along the Sierras and Cascades, what propagates fire is the heat at the base. So if you have big pockets of slash, you're going to get a lot of heat. That's important to treat, okay? Not true in, for instance, Yellowstone. They just have pure crown, it just runs. You don't need the heat from below. That's not. Here you need heat from below as well. Okay, and again, this is really fast science I'm giving at you here, but those are the three primary factors we look at: rate of spread, flame length, and crown fire potential. That's three. There's lots more, but those are three primary ones we look at in an analysis. I gave you a quick handout. That is called a hauling chart. It's really basic, but it's really useful. If you look at the way that chart is, okay? Right here, this lowest one, see this 4 out here? That's 4 foot flame lengths. And that gives you the intensity, the rate of spreads here. The intensity is here. See this 100, 500, 1,000 in BTUs. Intensity equates to how close a firefighter can get to that flame. At 4 foot and under, hand crews can attack the fire directly. At 8 feet, between 4 and 8 feet, somewhere in that mix, the hand crews can't go direct anymore. You need mechanical. And then above 8 foot, you're going to need pretty soon aerial support in there. And you have to go indirect. And above 12 foot, you're usually backing off. You're regrouping. You're triage, meaning you're getting people out. You have to regroup. I'm not going to go. This is suppression classes. You go into all kinds of things, and I'm not going there. I'm just giving you some really basics. Now, I'm going to show you a couple things here. Well, in the bull's fire, sorry, I jumped there a little bit, but in the bull's fire, I wanted to show you a little bit about crown fire too, and just a little bit here. The kind of thing we're seeing here is individual tree torching. There's not a lot of crown for that to run. See that? Okay. Then you have group torching, which you saw in the bull's fire. This is not the bull's fire. This is a completely different training one I use for people to understand crown fire. And then this is an active running crown fire going up the slope. You've got a lot of heat there. You can't.
Is that black spruce? That bottom left?
You know, I can't remember honestly which one that is, Dale. Back to know which fire that one is, but that is, yeah, it's a pretty active crown fire. Here's what happens in crown fires, and just what does crown fires do? Why is it bad? What happened in Bulls? What happened in some of these fires on the Klamath? What it does is it starts lofting. It lofts embers up, okay? And then those embers spot. It's exactly what happened at Bulls. It was spotting in front of itself, lighting into the homes, into the yards, and then those homes were starting to burn, and then running, and you had crazy winds too. But so it obviously depends on winds to propagate it out. But this is kind of how this picture is sort of how that whole scenario works with the spot fires. okay? Now, I'm gonna keep going. I'm a little fast, but I have to keep moving. We're gonna move into a fuel break. A fuel break, what is the definition of it? What is it? It's a type of treatment, fuel treatment. And fuel treatment is a term commonly used to describe a linear or narrow treatment design around an area or along the road. We kind of all have a picture of what a fuel break is in our mind. Everybody's is slightly different. But fuel treatment is manipulation or removal of fuels to reduce the likelihood of ignition, to lessen the potential damage, and to lessen resistance to control. That's the goals of a fuel break, right there. That's the goals. Or any fuel treatment. Fuel treatment is just a type of, fuel break is a type of fuel treatment. Okay, it's a design pattern. What do they all do? Just what this workshop said. They enable safe firefighter access. Okay, and a little question down there. Will a fuel break treatment near my home ensure my house will be safe in a wildfire event?
Not necessarily.
And there will be more discussion on other speakers on this. Okay, that's, Kara said, please speak a little bit to limitations. Fuel break is not a safety guarantee for your house or your home. And I put an important note there. Fire environment, weather conditions will dictate a wildfire's behavior. Extreme wildfire conditions, such as the Bulls fire, can and do happen. No person should count on fuel treatment or suppression resource actions to save a home or a life. It doesn't always work. It doesn't. You can't. It's running so fast, they can't get ahead of it or get in there and put their own lives at risk at times. You have to realize what you're up against, and you need to prepare the best you can. And if you're told to leave, you should go. Told evacuation. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go into how fuel break works a little bit. It slows the advancement of the fire by reducing the intensity, allows the firefighting forces to get in there so they can take action safely. It can serve to improve safe evacuations for the people, homeowners getting out. And what's important is strategic placement of the fuel break. That will be talked about more in the other talks. But when we look at planning fuel breaks, you need to look at obviously the fuel type, the fire history, fire behavior and weather patterns, and then the proximity to the values, to the homes, to the whatever values you have. If you've got a forest, you want a fuel break around a forest area, then you know how close, how big should it be, but its proximity is important too. There's going to be a lot better pictures. These are just quick because you'll get a lot better, but these are just 3 before and after photos. Don't worry about where, because what's more, there's next presentations where specific right around here will be talked about.
Light mix.
Dale's going to have good, and I'm sure one. So I'm not
Light
sure
mix up.
too much into those. But before or after, obviously that was thinned out. This is hard to do so fast. But Kara asked, can I put a little bit in about fire modeling? Okay, fire modeling is what we do for assessing the wildfire potential on the landscape. Okay, there's tools you can use. There's one called Behave Plus. It's computer-based, and it gives you graphic outputs and report type text outputs, but it's limited to vector. Like you can run your fire like this in one direction, one slope, one fire at a time. So it's a little limited, okay? It's outdated, I guess I can say. No, it's not outdated. You can still use it, but it depends on the scale, okay? Flam Map is a tool that also gives fire behavior outputs, but it does it on landscape levels. So it gives you like a real-time look at the landscape and what every pixel, or every 30-meter pixel, or 10-meter, what an area on the landscape will do if you light fire right now. You put in a wind, you put in a slope, GIS pulls all that in, and it'll show what it does. And you can run models with it across the landscape. escape. Then you can show a treatment and rerun it and show if it improved the fire behavior. So it's really nice. Far sight is the same as this, only more technical, more complicated, but it can actually show how fire will move. It's live fire on your computer, and it'll show you how it moves. It's a very neat tool, very technical, and requires a huge amount of space on your computer. So we'll go into limitations, big time. There's limitations with models. Models are models. Anybody that's can be trained to run a model and run a computer. Okay, we all know that. Okay, but if you don't have like a GIS analyst with a lot of experience and a wildfire, a person that's experienced in wildfire and wildfire behavior, and you go have someone run models that doesn't know wildfire, they need to work together and they need to both understand each other. I mean, a computer person doesn't necessarily know wildfire and vice versa. So it's really important that you calibrate, because they can spit out beautiful maps. And you can take that out and go, wait. That's not right. That's not the way. That's not the way the fire's going to burn there, because I know the fuels. And so it's really important to have both when you run it. Flam map. Here's an example output of the property on the assessment done. It looks really weird in squares like that because of the way it's pixelated and it's blown up, and so just pardon me. You can make it so it's all smooth if you want, but I left it coarse. So the red, the dark red is 11 to 20 foot. The orange is 8 to 11. Oh, I went the wrong way. Anyway, the grades, the yellow is the lowest, 4 to 8. 1 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 11. 53% of the area was in this range, 4 to 20. So 53% was higher than what you can normally initial attack with hand crews. So that's the kind of information. I'm going to go into a lot of detail because I probably have to move, right, Karen? Okay. All right. This one I'm not going to have time for probably to go into. It's a handout, and it's a really neat success story, as we're talking about success stories over on the Trinity. There's a handout to look at it, but I'm going to go really quick. What happened is they have a really strong west wind in the heat. When it's hot in the valley and there's fog on the coast, what happens in the weather is you have the heat, the cold air sinks the heat, and it pulls, that heat pulls that moist and cold air, and you get this really strong west wind. Anyway, so they had to start here, and this is all their fuel treatments. What happened is, and I'm not going to go into this, you should read it, you have the print out there, but it actually, their most recent is this one. And actually, it went through all these because of the wind. It did slow it a little bit, but that one, the most recent one, it actually brought it almost to a halt where they could get a handle on it, and then they had one spot fire out in front of it. Here's a Google Earth of it, and they widened their treatment area to show what it did, just to show you the success of how that worked, that treatment. And that's what it looked like, treated versus untreated. But you see the different areas, but they had openings and it was lower. Again, that's when they treated, and above is where it's not treated there. I'm just showing you quick. There's a treated area where it went through. There's an untreated. Okay, prescribed fire. If you look quick here, fuel breaks are used in prescribed fire to burn from, to safely access it, and you can burn from it. It's a starting point. That's what this is saying, strategically placed. So you can get in there. You can that reduces the intensity once again so that managers can apply fire. I won't go into a whole lot about it, but fuel breaks are very critical for prescribed fire applications. Examples, there you go, burning along a road. Fuel break, they're using the road as a fuel break, and they're burning from the area that they thinned. Down below is a night burn. We often burn at night when conditions allow. It's a good time to This is Sequoia. I worked on Sequoia 10 years and I ran a whole program. I don't see very much helitorch these days, but not up here as much. But this is hand fire. You see, with the winds and the direction, he's fine. And look at those flame lengths, but it's because it's all going away from him. The heat's out into the flame. Then you bring in, once you burn out your lines, you can bring in a helicopter that drips fire from it. It's dripping fire, it's not water. It's called a helitorch. And you can carefully go below and strip fire below where you've burned out your lines. It's really a good way to do it. So that's the helicopter burn at some of the inland inside burning, and it comes out like this on the right, that mosaic. I'm just showing you, that's a landscape. That's how burning with landscapes. There's just some success stories showing really quickly. These are major wildfires and major landscape work where you can see this is the wildfire superimposed with the treatment superimposed, and you can see why this thing absolutely didn't even go. The intensity of how much fuels were put in, so it's really interesting. Okay, really rapid. My rapid rate. Yeah, go back.
The rodeo fire, were those fuels treatments before or after?
They started in the fire's 2002. These treatments go from 93 to 01. And so what this is showing you, Dale, is they happened to get this, satellite picture while it was burning, and then they went back and with GIS, they showed how effective landscape fuel treatment can be. It's an amazing picture of that.
Were they mixed and mechanical and hand?
I can get you information on that. I think it's a lot of prescribed fire too out there. They do a lot more, because they have bigger and not as much wooey. We have a lot of wooey here, which is incredible. So that was really fast. There's full courses on stuff I just did. I mean, these guys, California, that's just kind of crazy, but I just did. But I was trying to give you the basics of fire science. Really, there's so much in-depth training. But I'm just saying, never be afraid to ask questions of the knowledgeable and experienced wildland fire individuals in our local area. Wildland fire can be unpredictable and deadly. You and your neighborhood's education is a key to living safely in our wildland setting. And as I always say be safe. And essay always is just one of my terms of situational awareness, and it works with a lot of things in life. And I'll close with the day of the Bulls fire. When I got up in the morning and I went outside, I walked my dog and the left. Wildland firefighters are always like weather geeks. My husband is probably more of a weather geek than anybody I know. He's always got weather, but I saw that and I had to grab a picture, and then I went for a bike ride up the South Fork Road at 12:30, and I saw this really strange thing going on over with these lenticular clouds. When you see those, I thought to myself, I almost got shook because there was a hot wind, there was lenticulars, and I thought, oh God, I hope there's no fire, because when those surface, and I've done so much prescribed fire, when those things surface, you're going to have a fire. That's exactly what happened. So, now, any questions?
We'll take 1 to 2 clarifying questions and then move on, and then if there are more questions beyond that, we can ask after all the speakers have come on. So do we have any questions for Julie?
I had to go back, so I apologize on that. Any questions? No?
Okay. The handouts she was referring to before are up there. If we've run out, just write down your email, put a little star next to it, and I can send it to you electronically. But there might still be some up there, I think. Okay, next up, thank you so much, Julie, for going over sort of the nuts and bolts of it. Next, we're going to talk about what's going on the ground here. So for that, I'd like to invite Dale and Giselle Nova up here. They are owners of Able Tree Service and Nova Meta Natural Resource Management, and they're also the co-facilitators of the Mount Shasta Area Fire Safe Council and joint coordinators of the Fire Safe Council of Siskiyou County. They bring over 35 years of experience in fostering fire-safe landscapes, fire-safe planning, and fire-safe education to Northwestern California. Combined with applications of urban forestry upon wildland, urban-suburban interface landscapes, they're passionate in helping to produce communities that are more fire-wise in Siskiyou County. They raised their family here in Mount Shasta and have 11 grandchildren, and in January will have their first great-grandchild. Very busy.
And 12th grandchild. Any day. Maybe tonight.
Well, we'd like to start with our local community fire safety council. Well, let's back up a little. We're going to talk about fire safety councils and how they relate to fuel breaks and what we have to do with those. And we'd like to say that the Mount Shasta Area Fire Safety Council has partners. It's Fire Safety Council of Siskiyou County, Forest Service, California Fire Safety Council, CAL FIRE, and RCDs. Shasta Valley RCD has helped to start the Fire Safety Council of Siskiyou County. They were the original founders of that organization. And we have many, many more partners. All of the local community is our partners in helping to keep our communities more fire safe. What is a Fire Safety Council? Well, I can't see, so put on my glasses. Okay, there you go. It started, and many of you probably already heard this presentation, they started as fire-wise communities, started by a national organization throughout the United States. When they reached California, CAL FIRE took them over, turned them to fire safe councils, and we've gone from there. Our first fire safe councils were, as you can see, we've got a lot of support from CAL FIRE tonight, were CAL FIRE instigated and found us. They gave us our training wheels and then they pushed us and said, go. What do? We're hoping that we can speak with one voice. The Fire Safety Council is a coalition of public and private sector organizations that share a common vested interest in wildfire prevention and loss mitigation. Councils are dedicated to saving lives and reducing fire losses by making our communities fire safe. Fire Safe Councils, we hope, serve as a hub to help bring all of the different stakeholders together to discuss fire safe issues and prescriptions in our communities. There's a few. We have 21 fire safe councils in Siskiyou County. We have diverse communities that are far apart, so everybody wants their own, and rightfully so, because there's a lot to do in this county. Also, fire safe councils participate in public outreaches so that they can educate our communities about fire-wise and fire-safe communities and what it takes to get there. Here's a couple of before and afters right here in our community. Dale did this project. This is along Ventura Road. This is what it looked like before, and that's what it looked like afterwards. There's a field break along the road there. We also did a rebate program to help people with their defensible space. And then, of course, how do we know what we want to do? Well, we have a community wildfire protection plan. And that's when we all get together and we develop a plan to where we're going to treat the land. Where are we going to put fuel breaks? Where are we going to do defensible space? How are we going to protect the entire town? What are we going to do? We will start with a community wildfire protection plan. Now, there's several formats on how to do it throughout California. CaliforniaFireAlliance.org, you can go there. They have a template for writing a CWPP. What is the purpose of a CWPP? It's to improve emergency response, guidance and prioritization for community projects, increase community awareness, and greater competitiveness for project funding. If you want to treat these lands, you have to have money, right? Usually, or you have a lot of volunteers. So we've got to compete for those funds to help build these fuel breaks. Here's another before and after. Why a county or community CWPP is important? It provides a single document for resource users. It's to identify common projects and issues throughout the entire county or community. And it's to facilitate collaborative efforts in seeking funds. Other benefits: increased understanding of fire and fire protection, establishment of wildland-urban interfaces. That's all those houses that are out there in the forest, buoys. Gives priority to projects and treatment areas. That directs federal agencies and other agencies and community stakeholders to give specific considerations to fuel reduction projects. Siskiyou County, a while back, established an ordinance and created a panel that now reviews CWPPs and then recommends them to the Board of Supervisors. And they also established recommended guidelines. So this is how we come up with our criteria and how we plan and write. There's a lot to it, but this is just the short, condensed version of what a CWPP is. And we do have a Siskiyou County Wildfire Protection Plan that needs updating. We're working on that. We also have a Mount Shasta area CWPP that identifies plans, and some of the projects that we're going to show you tonight are in that plan. Kara asked me to talk a little bit about funding for fuel breaks. As you know, you have to be in a CWPP for almost any funder to consider you. They want to know that you're in a plan and you're just not out there thinking things up and protecting your own house or something. They want to see how it's going to greater protect your community. Here's a few of the resources that we've used. We've used the California Clearinghouse, which is federal funds. Now we have the CAL FIRE SRA funds and greenhouse gas funds that we can consider. And there's a lot of private foundations, including the Turkey Foundation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Many foundations will also support fuel breaks and fire protection projects around communities. And now Dale's going to talk to you about why fuel breaks. Why do we want a fuel break?
I got glasses. I can see them. I can see. It's amazing how when you get older, you got these things around all the time now. And it's kind of amazing, you know, how after more than a few years banging around the woods, pushing fire, this and that, you know, I consider myself still a student at fuel reduction and fire endeavors. I think back to one time when I was instructing in a class at Stanislaus State, where I was teaching an environmental biology class, and one of the components in that class was prescribed fire, and one of my favorites too. And I asked the class, who can tell me what fuel breaks are? And I remember one answer, well, I think that's where you can stop and take a leak and fill up your gas tank, right? And I said, well, that's one fuel break. But when I asked them if they knew the difference between fuel breaks and shaded fuel breaks, nobody in that class, it was an upper division class, knew that answer. And I'm really gratified with that great presentation from Julie. That I wish I would have had Julie as a guest speaker when we got to that prescribed fire component. At any rate, we all can learn a lot, and just right up the road, there's a laboratory, a living laboratory that we're going to see for a long time. And yet, social scientists tell us that typically 6 weeks later, people soon forget events like that. No matter how tragic they are, they go on with life. We all go on with life. We're already looking at, you know, how the kids are doing in school, and Thanksgiving, and Christmas, and New Year's, and then how we're going to pay the bills after New Year's. But I'm glad you guys are here, because you guys can take the message you hear and pass that on to your neighborhoods. And hopefully in your neighborhoods, we'll be getting some fuel breaks around your environs and hopefully making your area much more fire safe than it already is. Fuel breaks do a tremendously good job under the right circumstances. Under the wrong circumstances, like the perfect storm we had in Weed, well, it blew through one fuel break. It blew through 2 fuel breaks. By the time it got to the high school, thank God we had a 200-foot wide fuel break that fire flanked and skirted to the south and east and avoided burning the high school down, because if that high school had gone, as you guys probably heard, it would have went right into those wood-structured neighborhoods and right into the mill, and not only would a lot more people have been gone, dead, their homes gone, jobs gone, it would have been a whole different complexion for wheat. Maps verify Mount Shasta's fire history. And we only have, since 1911. But thanks to Forest Service and CAL FIRE data, we know some of the fire history. Thanks to guys like the late Bob Gray, Bobby Marshall, Tommy Jackson, a lot of other old fire dogs that are still around, we can rely on a lot of that oral history when we're doing fire planning and getting a tremendous amount of information where we know not only how the fire started, but what kind of fire was it? Was it a north wind-driven fire, a south wind-driven fire? It's amazing how no agencies mention a lot of fire folks right here think most of our fires come from the south because we often have south prevailing winds. But in fact, a lot of our fires in Mount Shasta area have been north wind-driven fires, such as the fire that burned in March with snow on the ground in Diller Canyon, started by an escape fire from, back in the day, International Paper, and burned all the way into the snow line for many days, tough days. And people say, well, there's snow on the ground, it's not going to burn. As Julie said, it's not relative humidity. It's not temperature, wind. And that was a north wind-driven fire, among many others. In 1936, again, north wind-driven fire. I believe this one was in October. Burned from Mount Shasta High School all the way to 89, about 2 miles. Taking out a number of homes. 1939, the infamous Deer Creek fire, started by an arson up at the headwaters of Deer Creek on the other side of Rainbow Ridge. And that's what burned a lot of Rainbow Ridge. That's what made those brush fields. That's what probably made 75 to 80% of the brush fields in Hammond's Ranch. And that fire never stopped till it hit the Eddy Creek drainage. And it was really rain that stopped that fire. And it kept going. We have opportunities to be defensible, be survivable, and most of all, be proactive, making a decision well ahead of time, well ahead of the next fire. Forest Service is being proactive and putting a lot of projects on the ground. The Mountain Thin was just completed after about 7 to 8 years because of the very declined timber harvest market. That project finally got completed, and actually the purchaser didn't make hardly any money, but as a benefit to our community, and he knew that he wanted to tie into a Fire Safe Council project, he pushed to get that done about a year ahead of the time where he had an extension where he could have waited 1 more year. So that was really a great public service for this community.
You can see that the purple and the light purple, those are all projects that they're doing on purpose to create fuel breaks around the city of Mount Shasta to protect the town. Now, these aren't necessarily harvest plans that are going to make them a lot of money. These are fuel breaks to protect Mount Shasta, and we have partnered with the Forest Service to continue these fuel breaks and to fill in the gaps.
Now, can you use your finger to show some of the Mountain Thin boundaries up there?
Yeah, and the Mountain Thin was the market for logs. The timber harvesting was secondary to the fuel reduction emphasis. Yet, it does take dollars to drive these kind of projects, and this was pretty extensive. Wasn't it about 6.5 sections, Julie, the Mountain Thin?
I think so.
It was a big project, and it went up the Everett Memorial Highway, up in here, I wish I had my laser pointer, coming back down the east flank, coming down across Highway 89, and tying in with our Phase 2 fuel breaks right in here, and it should have a little bit more purple in there, where they treated the Forest Service plantations between the north end of Mott Airport and the subdivisions commonly known as the villa subdivisions behind the old drive-in theater
Where
just south
is
of
it?
Highway 89.
I'm sorry, where's 89? And I think I can make it up, if I wanted to make it up, where the drive-in was. Were you talking about North of Mont Airport? Is that purple section on the bottom? Where's 89, do you know?
89.
Is that purple section on the bottom north of Mont Airport? Is that Mont Airport down there?
Here's the airport right here.
Oh,
And I don't
okay,
see
okay.
that is colored in. It needs to be.
So that's the area that
I
you...
believe this is the plantation 89. I don't see it on this map.
So that big
Pardon
purple
me?
blob is on the north of 89 then probably.
What did you say, Ron?
I think it might be south of that.
Yeah, it could be.
Oh, okay.
In the interest of time, let's hold on.
But at any rate, moving along here, the fire history that we have speaks volumes. If you go down the canyon, you see all those beautiful autumn colors. What you're looking at is fire history. It's jumping right out at us right now. Now's a great time as you're taking those autumn drives and looking at all those autumn colors to realize that history repeats itself, and it will just too soon. And as you can see from the summary of the Mount Shasta area fuel breaks that we put in, we're trying to capitalize on a lot of these fuel beds, historic old fires, where they're close to our wildland urban interface areas, or suburban interface areas.
Quickly, this is the latest in GIS technology. I'm hoping you're appreciating
And
it.
felt power.
So, these are the projects that you see here that have been done in Mount Shasta. These are ones Fire Safe Council has done, phase 1, phase 2, and those are our fuel breaks. And see how we're trying to combine with what the Forest Service has done. We're filling in the gaps. We worked with the Forest Service and our CWPP planning to come up with this theme. And also in the CWPP is the Rainbow Ridge fuel reduction, which Shasta Valley RCD and Siskiyou Land Trust have taken on that project, and it's going to cover that whole west side for fuel reduction. The one at the top is a proposed fuel reduction project, and what's not in this picture is it actually is going to go on the east side of I-52 and come close to Rainbow Ridge. So we're filling in all the gaps we hope to create a shaded fuel break around Mount Shasta.
And Anna, here's Highway 89. Here's the Forest Service plantations in here. Here's our fuel break. Actually, the north half of our phase 2 fuel break running from Interstate 5 up to Highway 89. So we can't really see. We put in a secondary fuel break going up a ridge that Pat Titus and I designed. Well, what I find typically is that the more fuel breaks we put in, the more interest we get in them. And this phase 1 project, which actually had 3 fuel breaks in it, is going to get tested soon enough one of these days with Interstate 5 on one side and the Union Pacific Railroad on the other, and a lot of homes congregated. And as you can see, a subdivision known as the Sun Mountain subdivision right next to it there on the west side. You saw this picture before. This was fuel reduction done by Summit Forestry out of Wairika. Did a really good job for us. One of our good contractors. We don't have any less than good contractors. We're the only kind we use, and excellent ones besides. And it's amazing, you would have never thought that house was in there. And this guy was a little concerned, an absentee owner, that he was going to lose a lot of his privacy. And fortunately, he had a Forest Service employee next to him who also has pushed a lot of fire, that convinced him with not only some good descriptions, but also some good photos of his travels and experiences, how it would be better to lose some privacy than lose his vacation home. So he became a player for us. And you're welcome to look at this 5 years later. It's at the intersection of Cantera and South Old Stage Road on the uphill side of the road. And it looks really nice. We've got a little vegetation up to about maybe not more than 2 feet tall on average. Because again, the shaded fuel break. And as Julie pointed out, the benefits that we have when we have shade cast on the forest floor. The before and after when you don't have shade cast on the floor can be seen as you go down from Highway 89 heading south on Interstate 5. If you look off to the west to your right-hand side, shortly after passing Highway 89's turnoff, you will see our Phase 1 fuel break. Already our growth on 10 of our regeneration exam plots average 3.5 feet tall. We've got some plots that are 10 feet tall with bitter cherry and hazel. So give it a lot of sun, it grows back way too fast. In that same project area in the Little Big Canyon, where we had 70% crown closure and a shaded field break, we have less than 1 foot of growth on about 12.5 acres of the Little Big Canyon. Our South Mount Shasta Phase 2 project, South Cantera, by all means, made a good impact on a highly recreated area. Go down there and take a look at the regeneration after about a year when we finished burning a year ago. And take a look particularly at the open areas where sun hits it. Again, we've got some good living laboratories, some very good opportunities for discussion with folks that don't think that fuel breaks are pretty. And a lot of times they aren't when they're fuel breaks and not shaded fuel breaks, but a lot of times we have no choices. We're dealing with old fires and fuel beds that need to be reduced, such as the Big Canyon up here in Phase 2 behind the drive-in theater and the Villa subdivision. That was virtually all brush field with this exception, and this was a set-aside. We kept this because we saw in all of our travels and experiences planning this project virtually no deer, but a number of mountain lion tracks. The predatorship was huge out here. So we zigzag mastication through and hand crew work in here and made a sanctuary for these critters so they could go from plantations across this open area and have a place to get out and through and places to hopefully avoid their predators. Yes.
And I point out that right there at the top, the north end of our project, there's the previous Forest Service shaded fuel break. You can see where they worked there.
Yeah, that's right. And that was part of our planning efforts, and it always is, to tie into as many existing fuel breaks and fuel reduction projects as we can so we can capitalize on improving and enhancing what we're doing and hopefully enhancing their older efforts too with maybe some maintenance or at least getting better access into there so they can maintain them in the near future. Before and after, as you can see, is pretty dramatic. This is that secondary field break Pat and I worked on, Pat Titus, that runs into 89. And with the snow flying, you can see some good differences. Shaded field break, and then what was a brush field there. Our Northeast Mount Shasta project, as some of you know, started from Cross Petroleum, went about 3.5 miles up on the other side of Cold Creek, the Forest Service line. That red is the combination of shaded field breaks and fuel fuel reduction around some residences that were selected for indigent folks, senior citizens that needed some help. And it varied between as little as 100 feet of width to one side of the track to as much as 600 feet in strategic areas where fire history was indicative that we needed to make it big, like this horseshoe shape that we call the Swinson Gulch area. That had fire burned big through it, pushed through about 1987 when an escape fire from Shasta East Park blew through. It didn't hold on the railroad. The railroad had minimal fuel reduction on it. But fortunately, by the time it got into that drainage area, there was air attack arriving and slammed it down.
Oh, no, I was just going to say we're getting near the end, and we just want to show you a future one that we have planned.
And that's this one right here, the Phase Force. This is actually a continuum And this will close the gap on our fuel breaks around Mount Shasta City program if we get the funding. In fact, just bounced off the final draft with CAL FIRE this afternoon. This is the east half. The west half is going to be tying into the the north slope of Rainbow Ridge, where, as you guys know and are probably involved in, the RCD, Homeowners Associations, CAL FIRE, Sierra Pacific Industries, and Forest Service have a series of fuel breaks that are reestablishing the old fuel break, the ridgetop fuel break on Spring Hill that was first established in 1934 by the Civilian Conservation Corps and Forest Service. It was unfortunately abandoned during World War II and never again maintained. So we're up to questions. Hopefully there's some good answers.
Well, and for the sake of time, we need to move on and we can ask questions at the end, as Kara said. I would like to say that most of these projects, we could not, I know that we could not have done them without CAL FIRE inmate crews. We need to have almost 100% match on all of our grants, and they have provided that and done some awesome jobs.
They've been a huge help.
Along with contractors.
Thank you, folks.
Before we move on to the next speaker, I do want to have one question for Dale and Giselle. How do I get involved in planning with the CWPP? If I'm a community member, what would I do to get involved in planning things like field breaks?
Well, when we have a CWPP, it was published, finalized in 2006, so it's really outdated, and we need to get on it and put on our new plans and everything else that needs to go in there. So we're writing grants to get a new one started. What we'll do, we'll hire somebody like Julie who will facilitate that whole thing, and then we'll have many community meetings where everyone will be invited. We'll come around tables, look at maps. This is what we did before, drawing the maps. This is where I think it needs to go. This is where I think it needs to go. We'll get fire planners, professional firefighters. They'll come in like CAL FIRE and Julie, and they'll come in and say, well, this is more strategic, and we'll delineate which projects are a priority and put it into them.
So keep your ears out for when this happens and take part in your updating your CWPP.
And usually from January through March, we concentrate on working on our CWPP updates at our local fire safe councils, and or at least the Mount Shasta Area Fire Safe Council. And we value your input, so go online or call us, and you'll find out when we meet. We meet in Mount Shasta the first Thursday of the month, 7 o'clock at the Upper Lodge of Mount Shasta City Park. And you've got certainly a lot of information that we may not have, whether it be water sources, you put in a new swimming pool like that, new road, maybe some fuel reduction on the back end of your property, or maybe you've got a neighbor that has just recently built a house and has a fuel tank to go along with it. Those are the kind of things that we need to know about. So we really appreciate your input.
Okay.
So Dale, just for clarification, how do you become more involved in your local fire safety council?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. You guys own your local fire safety council.
Great, thank you.
And not just Mount Shasta, there's one in McLeod.
And Dunsmere.
And Dunsmere.
And Dunsmere, yeah. Pretty much every community, especially in South County, has fire safety council. So if that's something you're interested in, please. Giselle also co-coordinate the fire safety council in Siskiyou County. You can get some information on who your local fire safety council is.
Or if you're in getting your burn permit, talk to the local guys at the fire departments. They all can direct you to your local fire safety council in your area. So when you come in and get a burn permit, just talk to them about that, and we can direct you to the right fire safety council.
So next I want to invite up a representative from the McLeod Fire Safe Council, Ron Berryman. Ron is a registered professional forester whose first 30 working years were spent with the McLeod River Lumber Company and the Champion International Corporation in McLeod. For the past 22 years, he's worked in forestry as a consultant for a wide variety of clients. As a semi-retired consultant, he's finally able to tell his clients that he only works when the fishing is poor. This May, his family was named as California's Outstanding Tree Farmer of the Year. Come
So I think we'll just put this on today.
Well, I think a lot of people have heard already kind of the history of fire safe councils and what we're all about. I want to go over just a brief for a moment or two the McLeod Fire Safe Council. We started around 10 years ago, and it was comprised basically of resource professionals in McLeod. We had about 5 of us there with probably combined of experience of 150 years, of forestry experience. And CAL FIRE had approached us and asked us to form a council because they wanted to get these things going all over the state. And so we agreed to do this, and one of the reasons we agreed to do it was that the promise was made, and later broken, that we wouldn't have to produce a lot of paperwork and studies that just gathered dust on a shelf. Well, now they want CWPPs, and so we have to get in there and do all the nitty-gritty work and produce these big documents that we weren't supposed to have to do years ago, but here we are. So this is the boundary for the McLeod Fire Safe Council. You've got McLeod right here. In fact, you know what? I brought this handy dandy little, there's McLeod right there. Basically the ski park right up in here. You're running down the ridge line between McLeod and I-5, Siskiyou County boundary here, and then a range line up to here, and then basically the 31 road across the top. So this is our area of responsibility. This is where we think that we need to place fuel management zones in a prioritized fashion. And by prioritized, of course, the city of McLeod, or the town of McLeod, is probably the biggest single item that has the most value, the most people, and is probably in the most dangerous situation because of the fuels outside of the town. So, with that, we decided to construct some, oops, that's the wrong way. We decided to construct some fuel management zones that took advantage of both topography, fuels, and access. What you'll notice is that within these fire-safe boundaries, we have road networks. And it's very important when you're constructing a fuel management zone that you can have access for resources to get into that zone and help protect, rather than have it on some spot that's hard to get to where people would have to hike into it. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to get fire trucks into your fuel management zone. So that's what we've done. So around McLeod, you can see that we've used the railroad right here to there. And then we use the haul road going down to Highway 89, and then Highway 89 down to here, and then around what we call Old Mill on that side. This is where we think the fire is likely to come from. It's likely to come from the south-southwest direction. And so later on, I'm going to be showing some things that people can do around their own homes. When I get through this Fire Safe Council stuff, my house is located right about here, so I figure I'm on the tip of the spear. Fire comes up towards McLeod, I'm likely to be one of the first houses that encounters that fire. And so what I'm going to be doing later on in the presentation is showing some things that I can give you people some tips on things you can do around your homes to protect against an advancing fire. The land ownership patterns around McLeod were very conducive to us being able to do a lot of this work without having to get the buy-in from the private landowners. This is mostly timber company land. Timber companies understand fire, they know how it operates, they know that they're more likely to get a fire coming from a residential area onto them than vice versa. And so it's very good policy for them to agree to help us on this thing, and in return, we've been able to help them reduce the fire hazards on their property and reduce the risk of fire coming from a residential area onto their timberlands. What we, I wanted to define a fuel management zone And I want to give you one word that to me kind of typifies this whole thing that we're trying to do with FMZs, the fuel management zones, and that word is separation. Basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to give a separation between your fuel types, both horizontally. You can have a few manzanita bushes on your property if they're separated widely from other bushes. The embers are going to have to get underneath that bush, light the dry leaves on fire, create enough heat to come up and flame that bush out for it to be a problem. Also vertically, one of the biggest things that we encounter is lots of fuel types that have no vertical separation at all. They're just continuous all the way from the ground on out. So our whole idea on these things is to get separation on the fuels. Now in our pre-planning here in McLeod, you'll see that these don't connect in here. And the reason that we have these in the position they are is because these are all meadows. Right down here, there's McLeod Golf Club. This is all pasture land all the way up to South McLeod. So what we're trying to do is utilize, like Dale was talking about, let's try to utilize some of these empty spaces so we're not spending money to create a fuel management zone where you already have a separation. You've got that meadow that the fire is not likely to cross over. So we're trying to use those in every instance. I don't have the rest of our fuel management zone, but this continues on down into the Squaw Valley subdivision that's south of McLeod. We've, so far in McLeod, we've created about 10 miles of shaded fuel break since our inception. And now our problem, of course, is maintenance after we get it done. This is Shasta Forest areas. This is subdivision right here, this section. This is subdivision, another subdivision up here, and one over here. Stuck in the middle in section 10 is Sierra Pacific. Now there are 794 individual 2.5 acre lots surrounding Sierra Pacific. So you can imagine what they're thinking. They were very much in agreement with us doing a shaded fuel break along their whole 1 mile ownership right there. They own 1 square mile right in the middle. This was done with grant funding, like Dale and Giselle are talking about. We get grant funding, we apply for a project. If they think it's a priority high enough, they'll go ahead and award the money. And then we're all volunteers at McLeod. Nobody's in a paid position there. And so we volunteer our time to go ahead and do the match, and the government agencies supply the rest of the money. I want to go over a little bit, now that I've covered this. This is something that's typically encountered when you're looking at a wildland situation. This happens to be about 50 feet from my home. And what I'm going to be talking about the rest of the evening is things that you can do around your house. These pictures were taken within the last week. This is a situation that these are vertical fuels. These are all small cedars right here. Here's a white fir right here that's grown up right in the middle of that stuff. I live right in south of the guest house in McLeod, to give you guys an idea of where this is taken. And often what happens is you have to realize that fire-safe environments aren't just the responsibility of yourself. The Bowles fire showed us that it's a neighborhood responsibility. You can have the best protected home in the world on a 1/4 acre lot, and 3 houses away you can have somebody that has a hodgepodge of this kind of activity or this kind of growth, and your house is probably going to be lost in a situation like the Bowles fire, because the flame lengths in a 44-mile-an-hour gust are extreme. You can't do anything with a 44-mile wind-driven fire. So this is my neighbor's property, actually. This is the southern end of the guest house property. When I approached her to say that, you know, we have a potential problem here. I've got a house that's probably going to get burned up if we had a fire in this stuff. There's no way I can stop it. even with a hose, you're trying to squirt water into that, it's not penetrating the vegetation at all. She very graciously agreed to let me utilize some of her property to give myself a little buffer zone so that I can protect my home from a fire advancing from the north. So here's what it looks like after we've gone in and cleared that. You can still see, this is the area that's cleared in here. You can still see, I left the screen, you can barely see some of the buildings and things in the background. We didn't want to open the whole thing up. Most people don't want to look at their neighbors. You know, they like to have that idea of privacy in here. But we thinned and pruned. Here you can see the pruning up and down these cedars. And then left this screen right here that's still hazardous. If there's a match or something dropped in here, that can still flame up, but it's a very narrow band now. Where before it was probably 75 feet wide, now it's about 30 feet wide. So she did let us do that. We're very, very grateful to be able to do it. This is the back of the home. It shows you that we're in a very heavily timbered condition here in the farm. And you can see there's lots of mature trees around here. I got mature trees around the deck. And I'm trying to I created this yard to give me some space between the timberland and the house. And this is another finished condition. This is after, you can imagine what this looked like before. There were several tons of material that were going in there with chainsaws, cutting that stuff down, thinning the trees. Some of the trees in there were, large enough to create firewood out of, which we burned, of course. The rest of it, we just spaced them out and try to leave. A lot of people would say that's too many trees per acre. But one of the things you'll encounter when dealing with fuel management zones is the ability for woody species to reoccupy that zone, and all of a sudden your maintenance costs become extremely high. You open this thing up twice as open as this, and you're going to see manzanita start sprouting in there, white thorn, things like that, very flammable fuels. So we like to keep it as shaded as possible to reduce that possibility. These are what we call feeder piles. These were just burned today, by the way. We have the feeder piles. This is from my neighbor's property to the north. She would let us cut all this material. We drug it over the property line and we stacked it. It's kind of pre-positioned for burning. We're not going to burn these piles where they are. We've got a safer place to burn them. We're going to use those piles to feed a smaller pile that's probably 3 or 4 feet high. One of the problems you get into when you start having homeowners doing their own burning is you get a lot of scorching. If I was to light that pile right there, I'd probably get some scorching of these trees right here. So you want to pre-position your piles in an open area where you have a large chimney effect that's very open to where you're not getting those hot gases going up. Even if the flames aren't hitting this, the hot gases from your fire are going to kill the needles. So you've got to put your piles in a very open area before you start burning. Another thing, it depends on if you're doing hand burning. I work with a contractor a lot where we'll pre-position, we'll use a small cap, and we'll drag the fuels in butt first, just like this. You can see all the butts of the trees right there. Then they will use that cap to push it into a very large chipper. We're using a 14-inch chipper to chip this material. The one thing I'd recommend is for you homeowners out there that are interested in doing this kind of work, it's probably a lot better and safer for you not to even consider the burning angle. I wouldn't recommend it to most homeowners. I'd say go rent a chipper, work with somebody that has a chipper or rent one. Maybe get together as a neighborhood and get a chipper, because it's a whole lot safer to get this stuff chipped and spread out in the forest floor than it is to go ahead and conduct a burn, and all of a sudden the wind comes up, your burn gets away, and you've lost the whole reason for the fire safe area is you've already burned up some area that you didn't intend to burn. So chipping, even hauling this to the dump, you know, you can do that. They're going to charge you to drop it at the dump, but it's a whole lot safer to do that. I've been burning almost all my life, and so I'm very comfortable with it. My wife says I'm way too comfortable with it, but I am comfortable with burning, and so that's what we plan on always doing. These are my boys today. We just finished our last pile. I put this picture in there because this is the kind of conditions you want when you're burning. You see this guy sitting down here. When you're burning and the conditions aren't right, he's going to be up running around trying to stomp out spot fires and things like that. You got the wind coming up and blowing your embers around. This is a very safe condition for burning. It's wet. It's a great day for burning today. We just finished the last of our burns around the house, and so I threw that picture in there just to show you what an ideal burn looks like. We cover our piles right here. We got a little plastic cover. Here's my north property line, split rail fence. The guest house is right here, and this is the strip that Mrs. DeBon let us go ahead and thin. You can see that before, my massive vegetation, my impenetrable wall of vegetation was right up to that split rail fence, and now it's not. This is Highway 89. I'm just on the east side of Highway 89, and you can see there's a few of these posts here. My battery running out. But anyway, there's a few of these posts that mark the highway boundary. The fire-safe line that McLeod had built only extended to the highway boundary in those posts. So what we've done is to make that boundary more effective, and a lot of homeowners should be doing this, I'm sure Dale and Giselle would agree, is when you build a fire-safe zone near your house, go ahead and take yours right up to the edge of theirs. A 200-foot fire-safe zone is a whole lot safer than a 100-foot fire-safe zone. And so we've done that in every case, and you can see, you know, we've pruned the trees, thinned them out, we've reduced all the brush. There are maintenance problems, as I said, later on. You'll find the brush will start growing in there. Personal thing for me, I prefer to treat the brush with herbicides. I know a lot of people don't agree with that. But if you like cutting brush, go ahead and cut the brush, and you'll have job security the rest of your life. Because it comes back so fast, like Dale was saying, you know, 8, 9, 10-foot brush in a matter of a few years. So if you like cutting brush, go ahead and start it. Here's another one that shows, this is the neighbor's property on the right here, and this is our property on the south, on the left, and this shows right down that zone that you could not see through earlier this summer. You couldn't see down through there. There's a lot of people, when they start talking about, you know, fuel breaks and things, they're thinking about a cleared swath that looks like a potato field or something. And this is a shaded fuel break. This is the kind of look that I think you want to get. We have enough shade there. I don't think we're going to get a lot of brush. This shows you the fire ring. This pitchfork, put this picture in there for a reason. There's the highway fence. The pitchfork to us is a very essential part of burning, because you get a big pile of slash burn, and you're adding to it, adding to it, adding to it. Maybe you've got a 1.5 tons of slash you burned in one spot, and you look at the fire and you think, well, that fire's out. Well, I guarantee you take that pitchfork a day later and you shove it into the bottom of that pile and turn it over, and there's lots and lots of big woody chunks that are still smoldering under there, and you're not safe until that fire is out. So for us, using the pitchfork and keeping that fire turned over all the time, is you're getting complete combustion, and you don't have any worries with escapes later on.
It's better to get your bacon inside the fire.
What's that?
It's better to get your baked potatoes out of the fire with.
That's true, and hot dogs. Yeah, you get the 4-pronged one, you can feed 4 guys at a time, so. This is the last picture I've got. This shows from my forested area. We're sitting on 1.6 acres in McLeod, so this isn't just something, a 1/4 acre lot that we're going out and doing this to. I am doing this every year for maintenance, for getting my lift on my pruning a little bit higher. And so this shows what the finished product is like. Also, one thing I didn't point out, the needles on the roof, you know, we've got them blown off. In one of my earlier pictures, I had the needles on the roof were accumulated. They were probably 1.5 inches deep, and that was 1 month's worth of pine needles. When you've got these many trees around, we're in a drought condition right now. The trees have been shedding needles at an ungodly rate this year. Those of you that are out in the yard and you're raking your yard every week or two and you're going, where are all these things coming from? It's due to the trees trying to shed the needles to stay alive. They can only maintain so many pounds of chlorophyll per year, and so they're trying to get rid of the old stuff.
How do you get up there and do such a good job? Just ladders or helicopter?
What was that?
How do you get up there and do such a good job on your roof? Is this just?
Oh, how do I do a job on the roof?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got the ticket for you guys. I used to go up there with a leaf rake, right? And when you get close to the edge of the roof, right there,
Yeah.
I'm 2 stories up, and it's a little bit frozen, and your knees are starting to shake a little bit, you know what I mean? A leaf blower. A leaf blower has 2 functions for me. It keeps the needles off of my roof, and the other thing that you guys will be amazed at, it keeps my fires going. If I'm burning in the snow, and I've got a fire going, and you're babying that fire, and you're trying to keep it going until it gets up a head of steam to where it can really burn, you get a little leaf blower in there, and you just idle that thing and point it at that little fire that you've had trouble getting going, and pretty soon you've got a forge. I mean, that thing really takes off. It shows you the effects. What Julie was talking about is wind and fire, and that wind is a very critical element, and that really points it out. When you've got a leaf blower going in the fire, and make sure you don't have anything that the embers can light on the other side of it, because you'll be pushing embers everywhere. So that was it for me and Julie.
Just one thing to add, that, you know, I just burned my piles recently too, and maybe it's just my fire suppression background, but no matter what, I have a hose going out there, because if you have spots and you don't have someone else up and you chase it, you should have your hose in your body too. It's
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yeah,
I'm not talking snow, and when you're in snow, it's a different story, but if you're burning in drier areas. then
Yep, we
have
got
your hose.
hoses. I got a hose right there. You can see a coiled up hose on the back of the house. We had the hose all stretched out today. I've got a hose on either side of my house. This is the neat thing about, we built our own home. And so we plumbed inside, and we have 2 hose bibs on either side of the house that we don't have to shut off in the wintertime. And it's really handy for a fire that happened, you know, that could happen in February. In fact, I'll tell a little, but I got time for a 1-minute story. You know, I got a little bit of time. Julie and I were talking. The Hotland fire. How many people remember the Hotland fire north of Weed? Okay, it was in February. How are you going to get a fire going in February? I was burning in Weed, we own property up there, the same day the Hotland fire broke out. I had 35 machine piles, cat piles of slash to burn, thought it was safe, lit 3 of them up, wind comes up, and I'm going, oh no. I'm stupid enough that I burned by myself. When Julie burned, she's got a crew.
No.
No?
Not the house. Not my house.
Anyway, that fire started licking, the flames went horizontal on me, and I've got 20-foot flames coming off of piles about this high. And I'm scared to death. And I'm stomping out fires in February, when I should be waiting in knee-deep snow. I'm stomping out fires, and I can hear the sirens coming. And I go, oh my God, you know, I'm going to walk out of the woods like this, my hands in the air. And they passed me by, because north of me, the Hotland fire just hit Highway 97. And so, you know, There is no time of year that you can guarantee you're going to be safe from burning. So it's all due to weather conditions, and that day the wind came up from the east. It was blowing 50 to 60 miles an hour where I was, and it was blowing over 70, I think, where Julie's crews were.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very ugly day.
And then one other factor was all the fuels were dormant. In February, there is no moisture in the plants
Yeah.
above anymore. They're all
Right.
dormant and completely dry. Things like kindred.
They're dried out.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's it for me.
Great. That was great.
Thanks, Ron, for letting us know a little bit about what we can do around our houses.
Yeah, you just got a call.
It should be back pretty quick, but Harper and the rest of us will help fill in. 'Cause I think
Okay.
it's powerful, but-
All right, so last but not least, we're going to have CAL FIRE up here to talk a little bit about how CAL FIRE utilizes fuel breaks, and then reference a little bit about wildfire and where the fuel breaks didn't really matter because of the wind, and where the fuel breaks, like around the high school, could have played a difference. So, I'm not sure who's coming up then. Harper. So first we'll have Harper Keaton then just in time. You did that on purpose.
Yeah, Luke did that on purpose. So this was supposed to be Luke's presentation. I live in Mount Shasta, so I live right down the street, so I decided to stop by and see Luke's presentation on fuel breaks from the firefighter's perspective. This is mainly about fuel breaks and the different types of fuel breaks that work for us and what we're looking for in fuel breaks. I know that you guys have been talking about the Bowles incident in depth. Ron Bravo here, Chief Ron Bravo, he was the incident commander on the Bowles incident. So if you have any questions specific about the fuel breaks on the Bowles incident, I'm sure he'll be able to hop in and give his perspective on that. So I'm going to just go ahead and start looking through Luke's PowerPoint. So we want to talk about fuel breaks and the fire. And there's three types of fires that we want to talk about. We want to talk about the fuel-driven fire, the topography-driven fire, and the weather-driven fire. And the Bowles fire was definitely a weather-driven fire. Fuel-driven fires are influenced by heavy fuel loading in the area, which creates access problems for firefighters. It slows fire suppression efforts and it creates intense burning conditions. And it extends our resource commitments. So fuel breaks tend to be effective on these type of fires. So what you guys are doing? You're creating hazard reduction in those areas, and those are very effective in heavy fuel areas, as Ron pointed out. Topography-driven fires. Topography-driven fires are influenced by slope, drainages, aspects, and preheating of fuels, which creates faster moving fires, slows suppression efforts, ground and air resources that have a more difficult time getting into those areas. Fire influences the movement due to the preheating of fuels, the radiant heat traveling up the fuel, and convective heat as well. Fuel breaks work well on topography-driven fires when strategically placed, versus on a ridge line versus a mid-slope road. So we have plenty of examples of different types of fires in Siskiyou County alone, of all three of those examples. The Little Deer Fire out on Highway 97 was a perfect example of a fuel-driven fire. The Happy Camp Complex, the White's Fire, the July Complex, the Log, I could go on, are all great examples of topography-driven fires. And of course, the Bowles incident fire would be a great example of a weather-driven fire.
Harper, before we move on from fuels, did he add in the aspect where the Little Deer Fire and the fuels treatment on 97 later in the presentation?
No, I don't think he did. So why don't you go ahead and
one of
speak
the
on
things
that.
about the fuel is that on the highway, everybody's been out of Highway 97 before? All right, well, there was a lot of fuels treatment done along 97, as well as the Klamath did fuels treatment on either side of the Klamath, and on either side of the Highway 97, depending on where you go on 97. Fortunately, or unfortunately, we had the fire, but the fire was moving pretty rapidly due to the complexity of the weather, meaning it was hot, it was dry, it wasn't extremely windy, but the fuels were so preheated and dried out, drought stressed, that it was moving rapidly. It hit Highway 97. It did spot across 97, but the fuels reduction work that was done along 97 and where it spotted into an area that had been treated, allowed the firefighters on the ground to utilize that space to be able to actively engage that fire and actually catch the spots, and in essence use that coupled with some firing techniques to pretty much stop that fire at Highway 97 and the fuel reduction that took place.
And we also did some things like use strategic roads that were in the area to fire from. So weather-driven fires, like Julie mentioned, weather-driven fires are influenced by wind, relative humidity, temperature, and fuel moisture. And fuels actually had a lot to do with a lot of our fires this year just because their fuel moisture was so low. Weather-driven fires often move faster than suppression efforts, like you guys saw on the Bowles incident. You know, before they even got at scene, that fire was up to the elementary school. And evacuations were our first priority on that incident in particular. In intense burning conditions, they create intense burning conditions, as you guys all saw on the Bowles incident. Before we knew it, it started at Bowles, and it was Highway 97 in a matter of an hour or less. Yeah. And sustained crown runs are likely with long-range spotting. A lot of the difficulties on the Bowles incident were due to the long-range spotting by the pines. As soon as it got up there on hillside, got into that patch of ponderosa pines, it spotted into the structures. And everybody actually had a fire in their backyard, and there wasn't enough engines to go around to put out everybody's backyard before it had a chance to spot again. Once it hit the cell tower, that casted more spot fires into the community and made another run.
How did it do that? It hit the cell tower and they did, how'd that happen? I mean,
How did it hit the cell tower?
no, I mean, the embers gathered on the cell tower and then added to it or something?
No. The cell tower at the south of Weed, that was actually a backing fire, backing into the wind that backed up the slope. Those pines that were in there threw lofted embers up in the air. But prior to it ever getting to that spot, right at where the origin of the fire was, there was a grassy area that also led into some pines that also had slope. So there was a ladder fuels that got into some jackpots. When we say jackpots, a dense stand of pines. It got up into the pines, it threw those embers. So you had, it was the same as Ron talked about when you had the leaf blower blowing against some embers. And that's exactly what was happening, but it was nature's way.
The tower is metal?
Blowing those embers.
The tower is metal, not.
We're not talking about the
The
tower.
tower was not.
Just the area.
Yeah,
The area
tower did not
surrounding the
contribute
tower.
to the fire whatsoever.
It's a higher hill than anywhere else.
Yeah.
The trees and the higher hill.
So when the fire backed up the hill and those trees started torching out near the cell tower, which you guys can clearly see from I-5, then those the embers then casted over to the community, because then it was able to get back up into the wind and become aloft and start spreading fires. The fire had already moved up into hillside and spotted the fire, started spotting into the Woodridge area.
And there was pines all above Woodridge. There's a dense stand of pines that had been treated, and we can get to that later, the benefits of that. But once it got up into the crowns, they were shedding embers all throughout the community. Those embers had a ignition rate of at least 100, and that's the highest the scale goes. So every spot that was out there started fire. Whether that fire was at the wood pile, wood siding, in someone's attic, it was everywhere.
Fuel break effectiveness is limited during these types of fires. And that's one thing that's key right there, is there were fuel breaks that existed in the Bowles incident area, but due to the intensity of the fire, they weren't as effective as if it was a different type of fire. It didn't have that wind behind it.
So if it was a slow backing fire, it wouldn't necessarily have the ability to get in the ground and run, but what it did do is that it limited the amount of fuel Julie talked about it in her presentation, about the intensity of fire. If you have a dense stand of timber right up to the road, no one will be able to pass through, including ourselves. With the fuels reduction that was put in place, yeah, it could sustain a 40 to 50 mile an hour wind blowing embers everywhere, but what it did allow is we talked about there was no fatalities in that fire. A lot of people came in and out of those access routes to get, some were going after their kids at the school, some were going in to do other things, and people were leaving, and it allowed us to get in there and work. Yeah, was it a devastating fire and did 154 homes burn? Yes. No one died. It's a huge success. That's partly due to the fact that there was access and egress routes to be in and out of that community, as well as the community was very fire-wise. Because one thing that we have here in Siskiyou County is an active fire season every year. It may not be in Mount Shasta, it may not be in Wheat, but it is somewhere in Siskiyou County every year. So the community as a whole is educated that when we ask people to evacuate, or if there's a strong wind and smoke's in the air, they go to the place that's safe. So did it stop the fire? No, but it's a success because it allowed people to get in and out. And when you can drive in and out of that kind of a fire environment, that's a success, at least in my opinion.
It's concerning that the jurisdiction problems, everybody's so separate. And I'm thinking about the schools, because we at high school barely, they made a point, they barely found the path. The guys knew what, but they weren't clear, and the buses had to turn around. And I live in Dunsmere, and I'm really concerned about the elementary school that have only one way that they're practicing to get the kids to a ballpark that's in the middle of the, could be a fire zone, and they're not coordinated whether we have a second exit. And
some of the coordination, it may seem somewhat chaotic during a situation like this, and it was, but there was also people that were sent to the school, to those buses to help guide them out and to move. The schools always practice exit drills, and yeah, was it completely perfect? No, but people, they relied on the things that they knew, such as practicing fire drills, doing those things and getting everybody accounted for. And they did get everybody accounted for. They did move them to the right location.
They did, yeah.
So the communication with the fire departments, the police departments, or sheriff, in Dunsmere's case, and continue the coordination. The Bowles fire helped highlight some things that we did well, as some things that we need to improve upon. And is every situation going to be perfect? No. But there is a communication process that's in place with us, the Forest Service, the city of Dunsmere, as well as the schools. So is there a way that we can radio and communicate with the school at this point? No, but we do have the first 911, which is Code Red. And for the people that don't know what Code Red is, you can go on the county website, log on. So if you have a cell phone or a hardline phone, you'll be able to be in communication, and they'll be able to do a reverse 911 to you. So there's things out there that we can utilize to communicate with each other.
So let's hold the questions in the interest of time until the end of this presentation so we can get through it. We don't have much time left. Thanks.
The Oregon Gulch. I know you guys are focused on the Bowles fire, but we did have another weather-driven fire that came down out of Oregon into California, and that was a weather-driven fire. It was what we considered a plume-dominated fire. And problem with on this one's not necessarily from our unit, but it was a King's fire. It's very well thought or well known. It happened down in Amador, El Dorado, and it was also a plume-driven fire. It was heavy timber, steep rugged terrain, record drought, fuel moisture, slope alignment, and up canyon winds. The result was 50,000 additional acres, run of about 14 to 18 miles distance in several hours, and 2 Type 1 teams, that's incident management teams, and over 8,000 personnel were assigned. And it kind of ran just like the Bowles fire, except it was a little longer in duration. You can see that nice narrow path. That is actually a footprint for a wind-driven fire. And if you look at the Bowles fire, it has the same typical footprint. It's long and narrow. And so that's very typical of a wind-driven fire.
Before you move from that slide, one of the things that I talked to Luke about why this is important to remember, if you look at the middle of the green section that goes off into a point, there was substantial wind with this fire, but there was also other elements that came with it. Slope, and the drainage. The fire was basically went right up the Rubicon River drainage and just took out everything
I
inside.
believe that's the drainage that you're talking about.
It like it flew in your fireplace, because most people up here have a fireplace, right? And so it basically, this all happened 48 hours after the Bowles fire, because after the team was ordered for the Bowles fire, they came in, which was very thankful, and Mike Bradley, who was on that team as well, came in and helped the local unit and the city deal with the aftermath. And then I got sent to this as the second type 1 team that I'll deal with this.
Real quick for people that haven't seen, that's a progression map it's called. So the colors are the progression by burn period where, so if anybody's wondering, the light blue is where it started and each color is a progressive, I don't know if it's a day or two.
It represents a day.
All the dark green is a bad day.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking, what did I guess that?
Field break characteristics that we're looking for is to aid firefighters with ingress and egress into the fire area. The fire, it may not stop the fire progression, but if it slows it and allows us to get our ground resources in there, that's also very helpful. It aids with suppression efforts. It reduces the crowning potential by removing that lateral fuel from the ground into the timber, like removing the brush and having that appropriate spacing. This is one thing that was big for Luke, was it fosters relationships within the community through fire safe councils and getting people together within the community to work together to develop a fire safe community. Because one thing I wanted to point out when Ron was talking about the guest house and them allowing him to cut on their property to create clearance for his house, the guest house already had adequate clearance. They did not need to let Ron cut on their property to create clearance. And that's a neighbor-to-neighbor communication there, and they work together to create that fuel break for Ron, not necessary for the guest house. The guest house has a huge clearance around it, and that was just on the outskirts of it. It aids with strategy and tactics for fire suppression. So if we can get the fuel breaks on our map and we know their location, it helps us plan better for fire suppression and evacuations, and it reduces the risk of ignitions. Fuel break limitations. During a weather-driven fire, a fuel break may not be as effective as on other types of fires, like we talked about the fuel-driven fires or the topography-driven fires. Location of fuel breaks is critical for its effectiveness. If you have a mid-slope fire, or a mid-slope fuel break, right, that means that you have a ridge here and the valley floor here, and you're putting a fuel break right in the center. It's very hard to stop a fire mid-slope. So that may be good for ingress or egress of the firefighters, but not necessarily a good place to make a stand. The width of the fuel break should be determined by the location, slope, aspect, and fuel type. If you're putting a fuel break on the top of a ridge, make sure it's an adequate width to handle the slope leading up to that ridge. Right? You're not going to be able to throw maybe a 100-foot fuel break on there and that's going to be adequate. It may need to be 200 feet wide based on the slope leading to that fuel break. And fire suppression and effective fire line is connected or anchored to natural or artificial barriers. I believe Giselle and Dale and Roland both hit on how they're tying into fuel treatment areas and trying to connect the dots around our communities. If fuel break maintenance is not planned and completed as scheduled, consider carefully whether the fuel break should be constructed, because sometimes it gives people a false sense of security. There was a lot of cleanup that we did this summer on some fuel breaks in
Parts of the county.
Parts of the county. Perfect. And this was just one example of a fuel break that was started that was never finished. So if you're going to start a fuel break project, make sure that you have the funds and the volunteer and the personnel to follow through with it.
We've kind of gotten hit so what's happened the last 3 years? Weather-wise in the state. Drought. We're in a drought. And sometimes the planning cycle works against you. And you have a certain amount of time to finish grants, and And this last 3 years has been very difficult. A lot of fire safety councils to complete grants. Can you look in your crystal ball and know you're going to be in a drought? No. But this is not an example of being caught by 3 years. This is an example of getting too far out ahead of you and not being able to clean up what you started. So they went through and did a bunch of cutting here and weren't able to slowly chip away. There are areas that we are trying to catch up, but do slow bits at a time. And sometimes we have to put in for extensions. We have to support fire safety council to put in for extensions, especially over the last couple of years because we've been hit really hard with droughts. We can't necessarily do what we normally do, is burn piles to be able to get rid of some of this stuff because of the drought. So the planning is key, and let's just hope that we can get out of droughts.
Yeah, I don't think that we were really able to burn last winter to clean up some fuel breaks that we had going on. Another thing, if you guys had fuel breaks projects going on this summer where you possibly needed one of the CAL FIRE inmate crews, were they available? No, they were committed to all the incidents within the county. So that's pretty much the end of our presentation. There's a little clip on Bull's incident there, but you guys pretty much saw that. You've probably seen it all over YouTube. So if you had any questions, Bravo is the perfect person to ask about the Bulls incident.
Not Bulls.
Okay, go ahead.
I just have a question. When are you going to issue burn permits or let the county issue burn permits this year?
We're still issuing burn permits right now.
Yeah.
And the burn permits, they're still required, but there'll be a point. Usually, historically, when you get towards the end of October, sometimes beginning of November, we release all restrictions.
Exactly.
But we haven't released all the restrictions yet. Is that time coming pretty soon? You bet.
Okay.
But this rain that we've had today and the next day are helping. But we usually write a burn permit for 2 years. Even if they're not required, come in and get it anyway, because it gives us an opportunity to talk to you about burning. There's several things that came up in both presentations about burning. When you come and do your permit, there's certain things we talk about. You have to have a 4-foot pile, you have to have 10 foot of clearance. What does clearance mean? It means getting down to the dirt around your pile. Having water present, being present with a tool, such as a rake or a pitchfork. So, don't let the burn permit hold you up. Come down to one of our stations. Right now we have 5 of them open. It would be helpful to help you out and give you the tricks.
This is not backyard burning. This is more like
large scale.
Yeah, not huge, but kind of what Ron was doing. You know. We're clearing timber because we have some thinning grass. We're clearing up and trying to clean some stuff up. It's not urgent. Normally they're issued by now.
And we've lifted our Yeah. Well, the burn ban's lifted. However, we're still required to use their dooryard permit. And it'll come at some point. But please come by and we'd love to talk about burning, because a lot of people don't do it safely, and we'd like to have that opportunity to go in depth with you.
So for the next 10 minutes, if there are questions for any of the presenters, now's the time to ask. Let's open the floor. Any questions?
I've got one for Ron, probably. On, not my house, but my property in Weed, I've got a series of shaded fuel breaks there that I don't know if all your guys know about them. And I understand that you have laptops or something now that the engines are carrying around that have maps in them. When is that coming around? I've heard that that's true.
No.
There's not.
As it relates to your property, specifically the battalion in that area knows. I know the station knows because they used to come out and train out there. So the locals have that data. I can't confirm whether or not we ever put that data into the program or putting all that in electronically for all the fuel breaks that are in the county, but I don't know if those specifically are put in there. I'd have to actually check.
Someone told me that it was available now, and I wanted to make sure that it was downloaded, so when everybody's got their laptop or whatever, they run into our place, they know there's a fuel break.
Steve Wilson has collected a lot of that data with all the different fire safety councils, and just off the top of my head, I can't remember what yours are in there, but I know they've been around for a while, so they're probably in that data there. Now, when we say data there, that stuff is available to us, but we don't have laptops on all of our equipment. One is, we're a strictly state-funded unit, so we don't have the flexibility in our budgets necessarily to be able to purchase those. We do have battalion chiefs that have laptops, but not everyone has the same amount of background and knowledge on on setting up their computers. So it's out there, but we don't also have the connectivity in the county to be able to support that, so that we'd be able to send data out to each one of them.
I was just going were you putting it me or?
Yeah, where is it?
But to address that, the Fire Safety Council's purchased some software with the help of the Forest Service called Red Zone. It's a fuel assessment software that does just that, Ron, and it maps all of the different individual houses. It even takes a picture of the house and has a whole list of what's going on in that house, if it's safe to enter or not. Salmon River has almost totally completed their area. It's all volunteer driven. So you have to get volunteers out collecting the data. In our area, we've only got probably down to a couple of houses. Now the problem with
Phase one project.
okay, so we have done some. The problem with the software is the technology is changing, the devices that we're using are changing, and the company that we're using is now going to join another higher end, more progressive company. And so we're kind of stopped. But there is a software, if anybody, has acumen or just the desire as a volunteer to pursue it, we can still pursue doing it. It does take a volunteer base to go out and collect all the data. There's a lot of data to collect. And then that can be put into computers, stored somewhere, and accessed by the local fire departments or individuals, fire safety councils can have that out there. And it's really good stuff. It's really neat if you ever look at it and see what they do.
Plus, we provide a printout to the landowner, and the landowners numerous times have given that, copy of that printout to their insurance companies and got insurance rate reductions.
Bruce?
Yeah, I guess this would be mainly to the CAL FIRE folks. I have a fairly large 50-acre parcel of land in the city of Weed, and over the last 3 years, we've been doing really aggressive thinning and fuels reduction work on it. We're surrounded on three sides by one landowner who has many hundreds of acres, an absentee out-of-state landowner who's doing absolutely nothing with their land as far as fire protection. It's really in atrocious shape. And the city has so far not really seemed to be willing or able to do anything about it. And I'm just wondering, is there any way to legally compel neighbors?
You're within the city limits?
Yes, yeah. And this absentee owner who has, I think, 600 acres of land is not doing anything, and it's really disturbing to me because we've done all this work around it, but all around us there's this really bad situation. It's in Southweed.
So part of the issue within the city limits, we have no jurisdiction. The other aspect, and we run into a lot of this outside the city limits in other areas of the county, and a lot of times it's the communication with the neighbors. It's because there is no ordinance. We can tell someone through the public resource code that they need to take care of their property or their home on their property with custom space. And we can't require somebody to do the benefit to that property owner on somebody else's property. So there's no legal requirement there. There's no city county ordinance passed to be able to pursue that.
There is no county ordinance?
No, I think they were trying to pursue that at some point, but I don't think it ever got finalized or approved.
There'd have to be a county ordinance on unimproved property
Right.
because we're limited to defensible space around the structure. And that's actually why I wanted to point out Ron with the guest house. He worked with his neighbor because sometimes our hands are tied as far as mitigating those situations. But as a community, if you guys can work with your neighbors to get that communication going with the adjoining parcel to come to some mutual understanding on, what's good for you guys is all it benefits me. The threat that you're creating on your property is affecting me because you can only clear up to your property line, right? And that's what Ron was running into there, and that's why I made a point of pointing that out because I've heard that situation so many times.
We get it everywhere because one neighbor does not necessarily agree with the other, and they appreciate all their growth, and they don't look at it as a hazard. And we have plenty of examples to prove otherwise, but there's still can't enforce it.
You know, one of the things that kind of clinched the deal for me was the guest house uses their property for weddings and things like that because it's such a beautiful place. And I'm going out the day after the wedding and finding drink glasses and burnt down cigarette butts laying on the property. So it was a very easy argument for me to make to my neighbor to say, you know, look at this. And she was a guest. And she and I are good friends, and she was just horrified. And so she was willing to do whatever it took, you know, to reduce that risk.
Now, in your case, is it the brush field surrounded by the plots in South Weed? In the city?
It's partially brush field and partially overstock plantation that was supposed to be developed, but then never got developed.
Behind Taco Bell?
Yeah.
Yes. So I know that there is some timber harvest rules that apply if they were to change some stuff. And I know that in recent history, there is talk that they're actually going to move forward in their development there. And to pursue that development, they're going to have to get rid of brush to brush. So I'm not saying that it's going to solve your problem anytime soon, but I know that we had talked about that because there's other issues within that brush field that affect the city, and that had to do with people that would spend time in there. And to be frank, it was a haven for a lot of homeless travelers. And we have had fires in that area before, but we're able to get to them while they're small. So I think there's a genuine desire by that landowner to actually start making some progress and getting that developed because the economy is starting to turn around. That's no quick answer for you, but if you reached out to them in the past?
Yeah.
And to no avail?
Not really so far.
Have you tried lately?
This year, and it was I think Ron, you talked about how, or maybe it was Dale. It was Dale. How long it takes for someone to forget what happened. This would be a good time this winter because they've had trespassing, they've had campfires in there, they've had people trying to live in there, and this is historically over the last few years we've dealt with people in there and problems. And it's just lucky that someone wasn't camping in that location the day the Bulls fire happened.
So we're running out of time, so last question here with Julie.
One more question, just a quick statement, just tying into that whole conversation. There is obviously a big open space problem with it, and it's not just, there's several places in Mount Shasta. I went to talk to Rick Joyce and Matt Mello about how about if I could, do something like a big assessment showing in the county, here's where you have really big problems, at least to start the ball rolling for some of this, because it is a problem, not that we get ordinance or whatever, we get it into the county-wide CWP, get that picture of those big open space problems. Then maybe I don't know what exactly can be done, but at least it shows, hey, we prioritize here, this one's really bad, here's the flame lengths are gonna be this much on this one versus this one's a little less worrisome, that kind of thing.
I mean, one of the areas in South Dunsmuir was addressed, the hobo camp. You know what, they were able to go in there, do fuel treatment. We're still having issues in the hobo camp because now that it's cleaned up, other things are popping up. So we have a transient problem in this county, especially in the south, especially with in the summertime. But anyway, that's a different issue.
Yeah.
It isn't, but it's tied in with the fire safety.
Right,
issues.
and getting them,
Unfortunately, we're out of time at this point, so as we're clearing up, feel free to approach speakers individually, one-on-one.